and ready to study. That's great. So let's join together in our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Hello, hello. I want you to think for a moment before we dive into the text, and there's actually a lot of Torah that we're going to look at today. But I want you to think about why people cry. And let's just take just a moment before we look at the text to talk about what is it that causes tears? I say as actually my allergies are getting me, so I'm tearing. Cindy, go ahead.
Sadness and happiness.
Polar opposite emotions. Great.
You could cry at a death, you could cry at a wedding.
Absolutely. Merle, go ahead.
Emotions in general. I mean, your emotions can go in all different directions depending on what's happening.
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm.
And that can
Yeah.
go with happy and sad as well.
Happy and sad in some ways feel like the extremities, right? The
Right.
polarities, excuse me, with emotions, but you're saying all different emotions.
Right.
I was with my children the other day, and I mean, I'm with them often, but one of my kids said to me, we were reflecting on something that had happened a couple of years ago. And one of my kids said, I can't believe I was laughing. It wasn't really funny, but I just found myself laughing. So I think perhaps the opposite with crying, or opposite but the same, right? So some sort of maybe it's not, tears are not necessarily a product of what the emotion is, but instead perhaps about the intensity of emotion. Right, because we also are sad, I would imagine, and different people, everybody's different, but often are sad without tears as well, and happy without tears as well. So our Torah today, we find ourselves in the middle of the Joseph narrative. So, Joseph, our patriarch, his story goes on and on and on. He gets a lot of geography in the book of Genesis. And he's Joseph, the patriarch. Our Torah is not exactly known for being sensitive, right? And so, yet we find Joseph who cries. He is, as commentators have said, he's a crybaby. We don't necessarily think of Joseph in those terms, but we're going to look at three instances where he cries. One is actually not from this week's Torah portion. We're going to look at two times when he cries in this week's Torah portion, and then one instance from next week's Torah portion. We'll have to make sure you don't look at the same section next week. Or maybe you will, and you'll get a different take on it. But as we look at these circumstances, what I'm curious to know is your take on what is it that's causing him to cry in each of these instances. So allow me to, here we go, I'll share my screen. Okay. Actually, before we begin, let me give a little bit of context. Joseph, maybe we can do this, let's do this collectively. When we're about to meet Joseph, he is in the good stead of the Pharaoh, right? He has made his way into the Pharaoh's he is his trusted confidant. And it's important to keep in mind what came before this. So we know that Joseph is one of many brothers. Who remembers what happened to Joseph with his brothers? Cindy, go ahead.
They're jealous of him because he's the father's favorite, and the father sends him out to Shechem to find them, see how they're doing. And they initially plan to kill him, but I think it's either Reuben or Judah say, well, no, let's just sell him to this traveling band. And so they sell him and then tell the father that he died.
Great. I mean, not great. This is terrible, but well done. Well done. He has this sordid relationship with his brothers. It's really, really quite contentious. And he is sold off, as you just said, instead of being killed. And that peace with the father is Jacob, right? The peace with his father is not to be underplayed. It's actually crucially important that Jacob, the father, is under the impression that he has lost this favorite child. I mean, the whole thing is that he is the favored child. And why is he the favored child? Does anybody know?
Yes.
Benjamin, oh, go ahead, Cindy.
He's the firstborn of his favorite wife, Rachel.
Great. It is completely circumstances that have nothing to do with what he actually brings to the table. With intention, it's what he's born into. It's the birth order, and it is the mother that he is born to, right? Because Jacob has these others. And before we look at this a little more carefully, who knows there's one other of the sons that was born to Rachel. So really just one other full brother for Joseph. Susan, what were you going to say?
Benjamin.
Benjamin, great. I feel like we should have let Ben have that one, but yes.
Is Benjamin also a favorite, or is it because Rachel died in his childbirth that he's not elevated?
He is. I'm actually gonna maybe pause. That's a great question. Let's pause it because some of these tiers are gonna have to do with Benjamin.
Okay.
So let's come back to that. It's not exactly clear, but I have a feeling that my quick answer would be yes and. Yes and. Okay, so let's look at these circumstances of Joseph's tears and try and, put on our pop psychology hat and try and get a sense of what's going on here. So here is Joseph. I started to give the context and then forgot to give the context for this section. Joseph has come into Pharaoh's household. He is in the position of power of giving out. This is actually quite important. Giving out the provisions, the food provisions, in the middle of when there is a famine, right? So his brothers, he's been separated from his brothers for many years, and he was left to die essentially, or sold off into slavery, and the commentators say God has been on his side. The Torah says God has been on his side. However you analyze it, he's like a cat with 9 lives, and he keeps coming back. And he is now, not only has he survived when he shouldn't have survived, he has just continued to gain power and power and power amidst this famine. And his brothers from the land, he's down in Egypt, and his brothers in the land of Canaan in the famine are sent to the guy in Egypt who's in the position of power giving out food by Jacob, by their father. None of them have any idea who this person is. Okay. So on the 3rd day, so here's this reunion. Joseph knows who his brothers are. His brothers do not know who he is because it's been so long, and he speaks their language, he can hear them. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, these are his brothers, "Do this and you shall live. for I am a God-fearing man. If you are honest men, let one of you brothers be held in your place of detention, while the rest of you go and take home rations for your starving households. But this is not without conditions. You must bring me your youngest brother, that your words may be verified and that you may not die. And they did accordingly. They said to one another, Alas, are we being punished on account of our brother because we looked on at his anguish, yet paid no heed as he pleaded with us? That is why distress has come upon us. We'll keep reading in just a moment. Anyone want to kind of put in context just the surface level of what the story, what's going on with the brothers?
They're afraid and reflecting on what they had done, if they're going to find out, and if Dad or Joseph is going to find out about it.
Right, because the brothers have not only done this terrible thing to Joseph, but they went to their father and played innocent, right? I mean, they really did a horrible thing. They really did a horrible thing. So they are afraid. The father, Jacob, had put them into this position of go and, collect what you can, get the rations that you can, do it and bring it back to us. And then what happens here? What is Joseph pulling? What's the trick that he's pulling with them here?
Leaving one of the brothers there as hostage.
Yes, he's hostage. He's taking a hostage, one of his own brothers as a hostage. Why would he do this?
Well, it's a bargain. Leave the brother here with me, and you go back, and he's going to be what, ransom or it's not ransom. You don't get it.
Yeah.
If you don't leave your brother here.
There is a condition, and it's a huge condition. Ben, go ahead.
Rabbi, a question, please. He says leave a brother here as hostage, but isn't he a brother? So why can't, is there sort of a play on words that he's already there?
I think it's a play on emotions is what it is. It is a play on words, but it's because he, at this moment in time, and I just brought this excerpt instead of the whole thing because it goes on for many chapters. At this moment in time, Joseph knows that he's one of the brothers, but the brothers have no idea that he is their brother. In fact, they think he's probably dead by now, right? Or sold into, he's a slave somewhere, right? So he's holding all of the power, the emotional power here, and the material power because it's a famine and they are desperate for food and they're desperate. Let me put it this way. The brothers are desperate for nourishment. And here's maybe the multi-layered literary piece, right? They are desperate for food. They're desperate for the approval of their father because remember, the whole thing started because Joseph was the favorite son. They're all trying to find favor in Jacob's eyes. Jacob sent them to do this, right? So here they are, and Joseph has all of the power. He went from being in the pit with literally none of the power, bless you, to all of the power. He holds the food, he holds the rations, he holds the knowledge of what's going on here, and he's able to, I'll say this in a kind way, manipulate everything that's about to happen. You can only imagine, we talked earlier about the power of emotions. Can imagine the emotions that are flooding through the brothers as they approach this seeming stranger for the rations. You can imagine Joseph's emotion, the flood of emotions going through him as he knows what's going on. And then the extra emotions for the brother when he puts his conditions out there. Fine, here you go. Have it. But you can have the food, but there's a condition here. So let's read just a tiny bit more and we'll see where this goes. Okay, so they said to one another in a language, by the way, that they don't know that Joseph understands, but Joseph understands. Are we being punished on account of our brother, meaning Joseph, for what they had done to Joseph? Because we looked on at his anguish and didn't pay heed when he pleaded with us. That's why this distress has come upon us. So they think there's some sort of a punishment because they're having to do what they know is going to kill their father to leave another son there. Okay, starting with verse 22. Then Reuben spoke up, and Cindy, I think you said this before, I'm not sure. Who was it who said, early on had said, let's not kill him? Then Reuben spoke up and said to them, to the other brothers, didn't I tell you, do no wrong to the boy? But you paid no heed. Now comes the reckoning for his blood. So Reuben is saying, I tried. My hands are clean here. This is your fault. So what we know about family dynamics or group dynamics, it doesn't seem so surprising that here's this tension and it's yours and it's not mine. And so there's this discord between the brothers. And then the narrative comes to tell us they didn't know that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between him and them. And the part in the blue here is where Joseph cries. So Joseph knows, and he knows that they don't know, but he knows. He, meaning Joseph, turned away from them and he wept. He came back to them and spoke to them. And he took Simeon from among them and had him bound before their eyes. This is the ransom brother. Then Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, return each one's money to his sack, and give them provisions for the journey. And this was done for them. Okay, so let's analyze his crying here. What's it about? Cindy, go ahead.
Well, I think first of all, the emotion of seeing them, from my notes, this is 20 years later,
Yeah.
finding out that his father is still alive, which you wonder, like in 20 years, why he never checked, but he's finding out for the first time his father's still alive, but also hearing there's some remorse from his brothers.
That the brothers have remorse.
Yeah, maybe we're being punished because of what we did.
So what emotion, if you were Joseph, what would be the emotion driving those tears?
I think they're good tears.
Because he knows his father's still alive, because he sees that there's remorse on behalf of the brothers.
So I think, as
Great.
Meryl said, it's just a release of emotions, all these pent up years of all the emotions.
Absolutely, which is so understandable. Go ahead, Susan.
I'm not sure he's aware or that they have remorse yet. They have, Benjamin, you were going to say that too. I don't think it's remorse. They're talking about being found out and what they recognized did wrong, but it's your fault, says Reuben. And they're all like, they're going to point their fingers at one another. I think it's more fear. But I think Joseph is overwhelmed by seeing his brothers, the ones, and then also the emotion, how to deal with them. They were incredibly cruel to him. And now they're coming back, on their bended knees, let's say, after writing a candle. I think it's an overwhelming emotion to see them again and to know his father is alive. And that the youngest is alive, his brother Benjamin.
Okay, great. Ben, were you going to say something else?
Well, kind of it. I just think, maybe he was so disappointed in his brothers. He sometimes we think others are like we are, and everybody's going to treat everybody like one treats others, and these expectations, and he's just so disappointed that he was so let down that he cried.
Great. Thank you for that. You know, it's interesting to think, um, Susan, you used the word overwhelm. And I think that there has to be overwhelm in this. But what's interesting about overwhelm is that in some ways, you could make the case that that is not by itself an emotion. That is an emotion that kind of spans all of the other emotions that we're talking about. Overwhelmed with relief, overwhelmed with fear, overwhelmed with all of the other pieces that we're talking about, that this is the first reunion. You can imagine how overwhelming that would be. Reunion, if you want to call it that. The encounter, the encounter. Go ahead, Susan. Oh, you're muted. Susan, you're muted.
I think that's a good term because there must be anger in there too. So you have conflicting emotions and, glad that dad's alive, but he's maybe a little angry with dad for not, for setting him up like this, making him the favorite brother. So, there's some resentments there, but I think there are also conflicting emotions, and that can cause tears as well. They say so happiness is, but I don't think this is a point yet for happiness.
Okay, fantastic. So this is it. He is in the position of power. It's all of these things. And we'll look again, but just at that verse in blue, what actually happens with his tears here, because that's important to track as we make our way through these texts, right? He turned away from them and he wept. Or the Hebrew says and he returned to them and spoke to them and carried out his plan. So it's almost as if he's sitting court, so to speak. They come to him, he manipulates the situation, and he turns away for a moment. It's almost, one of those like, just a little tear here and there. It says he wept, but he turns away in a way that he can wipe all he has to do is turn away for a moment and turn back, and he continues on. Okay. So it is this emotional piece, but he doesn't fall to the floor crying. He turns away and he weeps, and then he just continues right on. Okay. Now we skip ahead. That was Genesis 42. Skip ahead one chapter. Okay, so a little bit more context. So he sends the brothers back and says, "It's Benjamin I want to see. It was very nice of all of you to come here. So glad Jacob sent you all. Dad, obviously he wouldn't. This is all what's, I imagine, going on in his head. He doesn't say any of this. But the one he really wants to see, as we said before, his full brother, Benjamin. And Benjamin was the one that Jacob did not send originally. Why didn't Jacob send Benjamin? He sent all the other brothers. So why didn't he send Benjamin originally?
Jacob wanted to save, what do you mean? Originally for the coat?
When Jacob sent the sons down to Egypt to get
So
the rations.
This time he didn't want Benjamin to get into trouble with the brothers. He was his cherished prize, the only child left from Rachel. So protect.
Right. And this goes back to what Cindy was saying before, right? This is the one that's left. He is now the cherished one. He might not have been the cherished one before. He was the runner-up, I guess. But he's the only child left from Rachel, who was his favorite wife. Right? And so there is and he's the baby. There's something so precious here about Benjamin, Jacob says, if something happens to Benjamin, I'm no more. He can't live through what he would think would be the death of the last child of Rachel. Okay, so that's where we're at. But Joseph says, go get Benjamin, bring him back, and then we can talk serious shop here. And this is where we pick up. Looking about, Joseph, here we go, we'll scroll up, saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and asked, is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? And he went on, may God be gracious to you, my boy. With that, Joseph hurried out, for he was overcome with feeling toward his brother and was on the verge of tears. He went into a room and he wept there. Then he washed his face, reappeared, and now in control of himself, gave the order, serve the meal. Okay, so what's different? What's happening here?
I have one thing. I
Susan?
think the first crying too, also, which we didn't say before, was the fact that he recognized his brothers weren't contrite for the what they had done to him. And as we move on to the story, he has plots to see, and it's only when the brothers express some regret that he's able to reveal himself. But now the emotion is seeing his loved brother, his flesh and blood, with the same mother. So that is an overwhelming positive kind of a thing, but also with some, I think it's bittersweet because he hasn't seen his brother now for 20 years.
Right, an entire generation has passed.
That's right. So he missed the younger brother's youth and growing up and bonding then when they were younger.
Mm-hmm. Great. So perhaps it's extra positive because it's his brother, his full brother. Perhaps it's extra remorse. Any other thoughts about what could be different with this round of tears?
Maybe some joy to see his brother Benjamin. That those are tough times. He could have been dead. Who knows? But joyful.
Anything could have happened in the last 20 years. Anything could have happened, in particular in the time of this famine. And so here's proof. Yeah, you can almost imagine the power of this, of what's going on, for Joseph, watching his brother approach. He's alive, he's well. Great. So maybe I don't know if we could venture to say this is more intense, but he's getting closer to having full transparency of some sort here. Remember, they still don't know who he is. He knows who they are. And what's different about what actually happened in the crying this time? I'll put the text back up if you want to look again.
He left the room instead of just turning away.
He left the room. Great. And what else?
He washed his face, tried to get control of his talking to him. Now, get control of yourself. You've got it.
He couldn't, it was not simply let me turn away, wipe a tear from the eye and turn back and onward. Not that means it was simple emotionally, but here he needs more time. He needs more space. It takes more for him to regroup. And then he's able to go forward. Maybe.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Yeah,
Brad,
it's Brad. Can I jump in here?
please do.
To me, what's similar about these three passages is what Eric Auerbach pointed out when he compared the Akedah episode to Homer's writing, which is that in the Akedah, as in these episodes, we really don't have any idea what's going on in his mind. We're told here he's overcome with emotion, but what kind of emotion? And in the other episodes, we have no real, we're not told specifically what he's thinking. Whereas in Homer's writing, we know exactly what they're thinking in the Iliad, the Odyssey, etc. So I think this is what separates this kind of writing and makes it so contemporary is that we as the readers are really forced to fill in the blanks. It's not just all laid out for us, and that's the hallmark of modern fiction in many ways. So this type of writing is just so contemporary.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I love that it's that I've to describe the writing of Torah as so contemporary. I love that. It is timeless for sure. And I think, Brad, to your point, this conversation is very contemporary, right? I mean, I think about my grandfather who came over from the old country. It was Romania, but he only called it the old country and lived through the Depression and lived through pogroms. He didn't spend any time talking about emotions and what goes behind tears. And right, I mean, in many ways, this conversation is very contemporary. And remember, I started by saying, I'm reading this through the lens, through a Hanukkah lens. But of course, I come to Hanukkah this year in a way that, other than maybe last year with what was going on in the world last Hanukkah, it's a whole different time and different way of approaching it. So I love that. There's so much left unsaid that in some ways, the writing is contemporary. In some ways, our conversation is a contemporary layer onto this ancient text. And let's see where we go with this. But I think about my grandfather. If he could hear this conversation, he would just roll his eyes. Oh, who cares? It's so sensitive, blah, blah, you know. But it's all different timing for sure. Okay, so crying number one was this initial encounter. He turned away, he wiped his eyes off, he turned back, and he went on with his plan. Crying number two, this is when it's getting serious because he gets to come face to face with Benjamin, and he's not quite so able to control himself. Susan, go ahead.
Oh, I think.
Oh, you would raise your hand.
I think what Brad is referring to with contemporary is now an expose, an exposition on Joseph's emotions. Well, the human being has endured and has the same emotions. It's where we, good and bad. It's human nature. And I think when he's talking about human nature, is going to be timeless. So situations differ, but humans have enduring kind of emotions. So I think and we don't get a lot of that in the Torah. So this seems contemporary because it does talk about that. So.
I see what you mean. Right. The Torah is not known for being emotional.
Yeah.
But this is very emotional. And yet the description is just that. It's just a description. The analysis of what's going behind the description is something different altogether. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. Hi, Panina. Okay, so we are now going to skip ahead to just one little bit from next week's Torah portion, because it's hard to look at Joseph who cries without looking at one of the encounters in next week's Torah portion. So, does somebody want to read this? I'm happy to keep reading.
I will, if no one else wants to. Stubble was not it was not you who sent me here. And Joseph now is speaking to his brothers, correct?
Exactly. Okay, sorry. Thank you for a little bit of context. Up until this point, we've already said he's holding on to the full transparency, and then he reveals himself to them. And this is where we pick up.
So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over the whole land of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You will dwell in the region of Goshen, where you will be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that is yours. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, that you and your household and all that is yours may not suffer want. You can see for yourselves, and my brother Benjamin for himself, that it is indeed I who am speaking to you. And you must tell my father everything about my high station in Egypt and all that you have seen, and bring my father here with all speed.
Okay, stop for just one moment before we get to the big reveal of the blue verses. Here we are, this powerful, powerful self-disclosure, revelation, self-revelation on Joseph's part. And what's involved in the setup here? Well, it's not the setup. In this, so far, what Susan just read, we know what he's telling them is, here's who I am. There's famine still to come. I'm going to take care of you, right? And go talk to our father, my father, who thinks I'm dead, by the way, and let him know, bring this full circle. Let him know this is going to be okay. Okay. Then he says, and bring our father here. And then 14 and 15. Susan, you want to read? Susan, do you want to read?
Sure. With that, he embraced his brother Benjamin around the neck and wept. And Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Only then were his brothers able to talk to him. So this is the big week with Benjamin.
This is like the floodgates have opened. The floodgates have opened, and there's weeping going on in both directions, right? Okay, so what's different this time, but either emotionally or in terms of the order of events? What's evolved here?
It's increasing the depth of the weeping, but this has more of a happy element to it, the end of a conflict kind of a thing, it has resolution now. It had irresolution before too.
Right, there's real catharsis here. The other ones, there was a bit of anticipation because he was still holding private his own identity. Now it's all out there.
But is it joy or is it regret for all of those lost years? Again, we're not told specifically what the emotion is. That we know it's powerful, but we're not exactly sure what's going on in his mind.
I'm glad you raised that, Brad. Why do you think, anybody, we are not told about the emotion? We're just told what the Torah only says what happens.
Well, it says he wept, and that shows emotion. I'm thinking about families who get the hostages back. I mean, now we're talking in real time. And now the hostages went through pain. Or we think of the Russians coming from Russia, the emigration of Jews, and to long lost families, or Holocaust survivors who thought they had lost their family. And when they then greet them, that we see that what we see as images at the airport, it's incredible emotion. And I'm thinking that's maybe something like this too. They've lost, they had a time interval, which Brad had said, that they weren't able to interact with these family members, but now they can. So I think it's a welling of relief, of happiness, but of some pain that kind of lingers for the lost time.
Thank you. Beautiful. And by the way, and for what it's worth, how many of us wept watching those videos?
Yeah.
Praise God, may there be
Yeah.
more.
So
God,
now
may there
they're
be-
together, but you know what they went through in the interim.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm-
Ben,
I'm
and then
also-
Merle and Panina.
Thank you,
I'm
Rabbi.
also thinking about families that have whatever familial issues there might be, and all of a sudden they decide to fix things and make things better. And I mean, these emotions will come out then too.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think there's no human being that isn't familiar with that dynamic.
You know,
Right.
I think, Rabbi,
ahead,
to
Ben.
me, it's this overwhelming emotion of forgiveness. We have to sort of read between the lines, but here, excuse me, Joseph's brothers did some pretty bad things to him. I mean, sold him up to slavery, basically tried to kill him. But he's able, blood is thicker than water. This is my family, these are my brothers, and I can forgive them. I can kind of go a little further. Sort of a higher sense of what's at stake here. And I think to me, that's a strong lesson about the importance of family. And sometimes, we do have to forgive our family and stick together.
I think that is so true, so true. And for what it's worth, and again, we're only coming into this little window of Joseph's life. Our sages do not portray Joseph as being fully innocent either, especially as a child. They portray him as being very full of himself. I mean, he takes this idea of being the favorite, and some of my favorite midrash is him spending all day staring at himself in the mirror and admiring his curls, that he's just so full of himself. So he's not helping the situation either. And just like the forefathers that came before him, we do see growth in him. And so perhaps another piece of this, of what's going on, is his own reflection on how much he has grown, and maybe, again, this is of course reading into it, perhaps part of the intensity for him is his desire for his brothers to understand how much he has grown. Maybe. Panina, we're glad you're here. You're muted, Panina. Can you unmute? There should be something to click on to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, all right. I think two things are happening here. Now he's in a different position. He's in a position of power.
Mhm.
He is just as powerful as the king, because he gives the kings advice. So he assures his brothers that he still cares for them, number one. And he also tells them that he's going to use this power to help them. And this is very big because they came down there for help, because there was a famine again.
That's
But
right.
we also have to understand from this situation that Egypt and Israel were very close. That every time that there was a famine, the Israelites went down to Egypt to get some help, and they used to get it. So there was a relationship always. And when Abraham was captured, you remember that he told Sarah was his sister, and he gave her blah, blah, blah. So there was always some kind of like, I would say, it wasn't just business, it was also the feel that he is with kind of like a family. And I think the Egyptian looked at us also as brothers at the time, because we always got help from them.
Mm.
So he's assuring them that he's not going to use his power to hurt them. On the contrary, he remembers that Benjamin is his brother, so he's getting his brother back. But he also remembers that they are his brothers, all of them, even though what they did to him, is in a position to help them again. And that, I think, is a very important point, because they have to go back to the father and account for whatever it is that they did. Because he never told his father of what they did. And it shows you that he was a very kind man. He didn't want to ruin the relationship that his father had with his brothers. So we have to look at this whole picture of what he did and how it resulted and what was the motivation behind it, because we're looking at what actually happened to kind of like judge his nature. So he wasn't a person who was looking for vengeance. He was assuring them that, on the contrary. But what I am very surprised, and I always ask this this question, why didn't he tell his father right away that he was alive, that he's alive? And
Or his brothers, for that matter.
And this is really something that I could never answer, and the Bible doesn't give us an answer. Why didn't you tell right away when you got into where you were that you are alive and you are around? And this is something that the Bible doesn't give us an answer. And none of the story as it progresses, give us the answer.
Correct.
And none of the scholars ever looked at it and looked to see. And I guess because I guess you cannot really look for feelings when you tell history. Because history doesn't tell you about feelings. It tells you about what happens. If you're looking at the Holocaust, nobody looked at feelings. They just show you, they're just telling you what happened.
Well, and I think the same case can be made for the Torah.
Yes.
The Torah, to the extent there are very, very, very few instances in the Torah where emotion is described.
Right.
Even the Ve'ahavta that comes from the Torah, from
Right.
Deuteronomy,
Right.
says you shall love, but then how is love defined? It is all by action.
Yes. And the results. They're looking at the action and they look at the results.
Yes.
So it's the 10 Commandments. We are given commandments, but then there is judgment and there is also measurement of how it was kept and to what point it was kept. So I think emotions at the time maybe were not really a factor that will make a decision. So I think that's why we are talking about what he promises to do in action. Because
Yes.
I think also there was a point that they might think that he would want revenge. But he's promising.
Well, this was right. And this is what I was going to say when you
with your
first comment,
right.
that he also had to build trust.
Yes.
And this goes back to Benjamin's point earlier about the power of family.
Yes.
It is so important. And
right.
when trust is broken, trust is broken.
Right.
And so, but
in a way,
he's
he
not
also
willing
shows
to
that, yes,
to
but
that.
he also shows that it could be forgiven. That forgiveness
Yes,
takes
and
place. That's very important.
That is true. And he is likely unconvinced that they fully trust him yet.
I
He
can
holds, as
understand.
we said before, you said it and we talked about it earlier, he holds all of the power here.
Yes.
And so
He wants
they,
to make sure that they still don't want revenge for
yes,
whatever it is that the place
and
that he took in his father's place.
and they need to trust that he doesn't want revenge. He can say it until he's blue in the face, but he has to prove it over and over again because there's a lot of distrust going both ways.
Yes.
Susan, go ahead. Go ahead, Susan.
So Penina raised a question that I have always been concerned with, and just recently I read Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, who was also raising that same question, and I liked his take on it.
I just want to clarify for everybody. You're talking about the question of why he didn't just tell Jacob that he was alive and doing well from the
That's
get.
correct, and why he didn't inquire how his father was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And he said there was an element of there of Joseph perhaps being angry with his father for setting him up as he did, with showing everyone that he was a favorite son with that cloak. Then Jacob sent him out to check on his brothers at Shem. And there was some other, two instances where Jacob sent Joseph to go check on his brothers, knowing that his brothers hated him. I mean, and it was Joseph's kind of resentment for his father setting this situation up where the hatred that his brother had for him erupted in these actions. So Sachs says, does my father really love me? As it was sets that up, that if he really loved me, he probably wouldn't have put me in this dangerous situation and showered favoritism on me, knowing that the brothers hated him. Anyway, I thought
No,
that
so what is, and that is more evidence of what's relevant to the sections we just looked at, which is that no interaction in a family or in truth in any relationship happens in isolation. Everything is connected to something else, right? So whether it's dad set us up for this or whether it's, I have to rebuild trust. It's all of Genesis, right? From generation to generation, these same dynamics keep happening. And you can make the case that one generation is influenced by the generation that came before, because guess what? We know that because we live that.
And I like Benjamin's statement about family. I think that's very important. But when Jacob and Esau connected later, didn't they kissed and hugged each other? And I thought maybe they wept on each other's shoulders. I mean, that was a reconciliation too, which had some of the choreography of embracing and weeping on shoulders. I don't remember where they wept, but there was a reconciliation there.
For sure. And reconciliation with an element of
distrust.
I was going to say distrust. Yes. Of not fully trusting that things were going to work out okay. And by the way, this distrust comes back, it plays out for the rest of the book of Genesis, right? So anyway, so let's go back to these tiers. There's so much behind them. The first incident, the first weeping that we look at here is the beginning of the reunion, just kind of broaching this reunion. Joseph knows, the brothers do not. He turns away, cries, and then wipes his tears and carries on. The second time, they still don't know, but Benjamin's involved. So the stakes are bigger, stakes are higher, and he weeps again. This time he has to step out of the room. He has to wash his face, splash some cold water on his face, as we like to say, and then he's able to carry on. by this third encounter, when the transparency, when it's all out there, there is no, they are going to carry on. Yes, of course they're going to carry on. Joseph is going to carry on as the person with the provisions to give out. The brothers are going to carry on with the communication to their father and having this understanding. But now it is just a big cry fest of the best possible tears. Maybe that's a judgment of the most intense tears we've seen so far. So what is this all about? And ultimately, as we're approaching the end of our hour, I just want to look very quickly at a couple of commentaries because I do want to bring this back to Hanukkah. Hold just for a moment, Panina, if you don't mind. I want to look at a couple of commentaries here, and we perhaps won't look at all of them. In Legends of the Jews, we're taught Joseph cried because Benjamin reminded him of his mother Rachel. And then the quote from an earlier commentary is, "Only tears extinguish the burning coals of the heart," which is just such beautiful language. Tears had to happen. There was, according to this commentary, there was a fire burning, and the only way to quench the fire was with the tears. And then this commentary from the, I believe, 19th century Rabbi Zalman Sorotskin, early 20th century says, "One should note that Joseph often cried. In fact, there are no less than 8 references in the Torah to him doing so." And then this commentary about why. "One who has suffered greatly in bad times will cry easily even in good times." This goes to Merle's comment at the very beginning. It's just a lot of emotion on both sides. "The brothers, on the other hand, who had not suffered in their lives, didn't even cry when the situation demanded that they should. And as Joseph even cried at the distress of others, he was worthy of attaining his high rank." There is something here of his that reveals his empathy that he holds on to, this empathy. And perhaps to go back to what Benjamin said at the beginning earlier, it's empathy for others. I mean, remember, his job is to feed people who are starving. So, but also to make difficult decisions. So again, there's something about him being impacted by the experiences that he has had in his life. Want to very quickly look to this very often quoted bit from the Psalms about sowing. Debbie Friedman even has a song about the person who sows in tears reaps in joy, and it has to do with putting the labor in here, putting in the effort. "Though he goes along weeping, carrying the seed bag, he shall come back with songs of joy, carrying his sheaves." And in Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg, who wrote a big book on Genesis in the late 20th century, references this psalm. And this is what she says, and I wanted to mention this as we connect to Hanukkah. She says, "Tears are sowing. They are effort, risk, the seed exposed to drought and to rot, the ear of corn threatened by hail and storms. Laughter is words. Tears are silence. It is not the harvest that's important. What is important is the sowing, the risk, the tears. Hope is not in laughter and plenitude. Hope is in tears, in the risk and in its silence." So I want to read that last sentence again. And again, I want us to see if we can make a connection to this festival that we are in the middle of celebrating. It's not the harvest that's important. What's important is the sowing, the risk, the tears. Hope is not in laughter and plenitude. Hope is in tears, in the risk and in its silence. So according to this, what are these tears about? Or what are tears about, Penina?
It's about the unity of the nation itself, because they were, especially during the time of sowing, they were attacked by, I would say, tribes that came from the north and stole the wheat. That's why they stayed in sukkahs and slept there in the fields at night to guard the fields, because it was very easy to come and just collect it once it's ready without having to put the wool and the effort to guard it. So the time of sowing was very important. That's why they built the sukkahs, and that's why we sit in sukkahs for 8 days, because it's supposed to remind us of these times that the tribes used to come from the north to steal the wheat. And a lot of people never mention it during Sukkot. They don't even realize the Sukkot was built because of that. And that's why we are carrying the 4 kinds in our hands, to show the stages of settlement. You are starting with the, what is it that you, in the desert, you acquire the palm trees. So when they were marching from Egypt to Israel, first of all, they encountered the desert and the palm trees. Then, so we have palm trees over the sukkah, and all in the lulav that we shake to remind us. Then the second one was that when they came to Israel, they weren't allowed to settle in the places where there was water, because the tribes that lived there already felt threatened if we take our water. So they settled in the mountains where the myrtle grow. So we have the myrtle tree also as the 4 kinds on Sukkot. Then they came down eventually from the mountains, and we have the willow underwater. They were finally allowed to get to the water. So we have the willow branch included in the 4 kinds in the lulav thing. And in the end, we get the etrog, the fruit that looks like lemon. That's supposed to be the reward for their labor, that they were growing their own stuff. And the reward was to see the fruit. And by the way, today, the section that it's growing, it's the left bank. That was probably the better weather for it. But I'm sure now with modern science, they can make adjustment and grow things wherever they want, because they grow tomatoes in the desert and they come up with new kinds, real tomatoes for Israeli.
Exactly.
And
So I'm going to jump in there, Penina, because I love the
and
connection.
the etrog I'm just going to make it short. The etrog is supposed to represent the reward of actually working their own land and coming up with fruit of their labor. So we have the 4 kinds that we shake in the lulav, representing the 4 stages of settlement. That's about it.
Beautiful. And what do they all have? I love that you brought that up, and my mind hadn't gone to that, but there are many comparisons drawn between Sukkot and Hanukkah, which seems strange because they come, in some ways, they're on very different planes. But in particular, the piece that you just said, Penina, has a lot in common with what I was thinking, specifically with regard to this notion of tears. Tears come when we're willing to take risks.
Yes.
It's vulnerability. That's what that was. Joseph makes himself vulnerable, even in turning around. And sometimes we can't help ourselves. When the tears are coming, hold on one second. When the tears are coming, we often cannot help ourselves. And yet, we are vulnerable when we cry. We're vulnerable when we cry. The pieces of the etrog, the lulav and the etrog, are closer to that teaching from the Psalms, right? Those
the ones who are going to sow with tears are going to collect with joy. We're going to collect with joy. But the thing is also, he wants to show them that he didn't tell his father what happened to him is because he didn't want the father to be mad at the brothers. And that's a very, 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 I would say, a situation that shows us that he was very, very good person. Was really a good person. He didn't want bad to come to them, even though after what they did. He didn't
He
want the
did not want
father
bad because he's their family, right?
exactly.
He is their
And
family,
he loved the
and he
father and he loved them. He actually
exactly.
came there to join them, not to fight them or to tell bad things on them. And
For
he went there to help. And
correct, correct. So let me just, because I'm mindful of the fact that we're over time, I want to close
that's
this.
fine. Okay.
But your points are very, very well taken and actually quite relevant. For Joseph let me back up. We all know people, or we ourselves live in contentious relationships,
Absolutely.
and we get used to them, and we settle into a status quo. For Joseph to be willing to take the steps that he took, and I believe that's why there are these three separate texts that talk about him crying, each one getting a little bit more intense. For Joseph to be able to reveal himself took vulnerability, and tears are good. They're a very good thing, and they lead to something greater. Dave, my favorite teaching about Hanukkah comes from Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory, who raised the point, and I don't know if you've ever thought about this. Why do we celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days, not 7? If you think about, and this is just, now, this is another whole conversation about the different miracles of Hanukkah. If we look at the teaching from the Talmud that talks about the little flask of oil that was supposed to last for 1 day, if we just look to that, then by all stretches of the imagination, if you do the math, Hanukkah should last for 7 days, not 8, because the first day wasn't a miracle, right? If the oil was supposed to last for 1 and it lasted for 8, I'm no mathematician, but 8 minus 1 is 7. So you would think, and this is David Hartman points this out, that we should celebrate the miracle of 7 days. But so why 8? And Rabbi Hartman points out that the miracle, perhaps the miracle or an additional miracle, wasn't about the oil lasting, but it was that they bothered to light that little bit of oil at all, that they made themselves vulnerable enough. They put themselves out there to do what they never thought was going to last. And it did. It did. It lasted. It gave them what they needed to do. They sowed in tears and they reaped in joy. And with all of that, behind all of that is tears because they put themselves out there. And it was a hard battle to get there. Now I'm mixing my Hanukkah metaphors, my Hanukkah stories. But the fact that they bothered to light that oil at all, they made themselves vulnerable to go in there, according to the story from the Talmud. That's the miracle. The miracle is an ability and a willingness to put ourselves out there, even when we're vulnerable, to do things that make, by logic, shouldn't work out all right. And sometimes they do. And sometimes they work out more than all right. They work out really, really well. So with that, it's a loose connection, I realize, but between Joseph and his vulnerability and his intensity of emotion and the emotion wrapped up in the hope for miracles and the willingness to do something about them that comes with Hanukkah in particular, as we are just a couple of days away from 450 days of those hostages being in the tunnels of Gaza. let us not give up our hope in the miracles and just keep be willing to do the things that make no rational sense because sometimes they work out. All right. Shabbat Shalom. Happy Hanukkah. Panina, I'm happy to
Shalom.
stay on
Thank
for a
you.
moment. I
Shabbat
want to hear what
Shalom.
you have to say, but I want to let everybody go on with their day.
Okay,
Shabbat Shalom. Happy
Shabbat
Hanukkah.
Shalom.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Shabbat
Rabbi.
Shalom. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rabbi Lewis.
Shabbat Shalom.
Happy Hanukkah to all.
Happy
also
Hanukkah.
they also taught us things about olives. It has 4% value as far as like meat and chicken and eggs. And it was a very basic diet of the Yemenite society because it was growing in abundance there and it was cheap to buy, but it has 4% what is it that you call it that you have in meat and in chicken and in eggs? Protein.
Protein.
It has 4% protein. And the fact that they found this oil, it was hidden, and the fact that it stood there all those years made it purify because the thing sunk. And oil that was left that came to the surface was pure because of sitting there. So that's why they lasted 8 days more than what they thought it will last. And today they actually explained it scientifically that this is what happened. It got separated and it became purified, and it gave them the chance to be lit for 8 days instead of only one.
See,
One
there's
thing about it, just like they learn how to grow tomatoes in the desert today, they put a plastic over them so the plastic will drip back the sweat so they wouldn't need so much water to grow them. So they invented the baby tomatoes, by the way, in Israel, and they were
I
growing
know.
in the desert with plastic covered over them. So the sweat will
Rehydrate.
rehydrate it, exactly. So we today we're looking at things more scientifically.
Well,
And they build on it.
maybe another miracle then is our willingness
Exactly.
to
And
be
they build on
partners
it,
with God.
and they can find solutions to other things because of things that they happen, and they can prove today scientifically that there was a process and there was a reason for it to happen. So we're looking at everything as a learning experience today and as a discovery experience. And I think that we are never taking anything for granted. And we're looking at that as God watching over us. And that's something that everybody needs, because to live without hope, it's not a very good way of living.
That's right.
And
We have to act out our hope. We have
I'm
to act out our hope by doing our part.
exactly right. Exactly. I have a daughter that cares, one daughter that cares. The other one doesn't want to pay attention, and she thinks that I'm done. So there is things like that happening every day all over the world. But thank God for the ones who cares.
That's right.
Thank
That's
God.
right. And with that,
And
with
actually,
that,
and we'll finish
let's
today.
pay
And
attention.
Shabbat Shalom. Okay. So I guess,
Shabbat Shalom. I hope you're feeling okay.
yeah, I'm really okay. I'm getting better every day. Yeah, I'm just getting old. That's all. I turned 85 in December, in November 20. And I guess my body was telling me that I'm 85.
It's
But
good.
there is
It's better than the
no-
alternative.
You are not getting older, you are getting better and smart.
Thank you. Thank
That's
you.
right.
That's what I'm trying
That's
to
right.
think of. But yeah, I have a few challenges physically that I have to deal with, but it's coming along. And Talia is really amazing.
Good.
She's absolutely
You're
unbelievable.
getting good care.
Smart and strong and knowledgeable and caring. And she doesn't let me just disappear from the face of the earth.
Good.
And
We all need Italia.
thank you. Exactly.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you. And I'm so proud to be a member of your congregation.
of our congregation.
Yes, because I think that you don't stop digging and looking for truth and looking for reasons and learning from it and getting the best out of it so we can contribute it our set of laws. And it's very important.
Beautiful.
So,
Thank you. It's
yeah,
a
and
conversation.
the word kabed et avicha v'et imecha, the word kabed comes from the word kaved, which means heavy. So
I know.
carry for your parents, it's a heavy job. It's a heavy duty.
It
So,
is, but you also hold on like it matters. You hold on tight.
yes, yes. And
Yeah.
you're supposed to do it because your kids are going to learn from you. And they see what you do for your parents, they'll do the same
That's
for
right.
you.
That's
So
right.
that's the
Well,
whole
you've
idea.
obviously done well because you're being
Thank
treated
you.
well.
And yes,
All
I
right.
have been
Shabbat
taken care of.
shalom.
Shabbat
Happy
shalom to
Hanukkah.
everybody. How is Rabbi David, by the way?
I haven't heard anything in a little bit. I saw him a couple weeks ago, a week and a half ago.
Okay,
Um,
I hope he's
so
okay. He's
yeah,
a
me
very
too.
smart man. He comes up from a very interesting point of view.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure, for
Okay,
sure.
Shabbat
All
shalom
right,
to
Shabbat
everybody.
shalom. Take care. Happy Hanukkah.